Hi everyone, welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have David Rothschild, who works in economics. Hi.
Morning.
Morning, how are you?
Good. So, what can I answer for you today?
Um, so so could you please introduce yourself first, and kind of what do you do?
My name is David Rothschild, and I'm an economist at Microsoft Research in New York City. And my work focuses on understanding the market for news and information, as well as the market for advertising, and how this affects public opinion.
Mm-hmm. So why did you choose this career, like initially?
So, why did I choose this career? I was interested in understanding economics and what you could get from being a PhD economist is the underlying estimation strategies to really understand not how correlations work, but really where causality comes in. It's the ability to collect the right data, to understand the various biases that are attached to various strategies, and really get how these various relationships that we care about work. And my initial work, my PhD thesis was about market design. It was understanding how various markets encourage a different type of behavior, specifically looking in this case at futures markets and prediction markets and other places where traders were engaged in various schemes in order to maximize their return, but in doing so provided different types of information under different types of conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that led into work in a more general sense of understanding how people reveal behavior. And part of that was understanding polling and kind of revolutions that was going on in there. And part of it was understanding the different stimulus that people are given, whether or not that's advertisements or news, and the personalization and targeting that around it. So it really kind of surrounded a larger ecosystem, but being able to do so from a PhD research position has really been really an awesome experience and something I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. Why do you think truth is so important, and why do you think misinformation is such a big issue right now?
Um, I didn't say truth was important. You said truth was important. Uh,
Mhm.
I do think truth is important to an extent. The There's a lot of different ways in which people view the idea of what truth is, and there's various different aspects that people are concerned about. So, one thing that people are concerned very much about right now is the idea of course, people being well informed, and that is very different from a concern about people producing misinformation. So people are always going to produce misinformation, and people are always going to be at various levels of informed. But a lot of people are misinformed because they don't consume very much news at all. A lot of people are misinformed because and digest different portions of it. People are going to be misinformed because they want to be misinformed, and they choose to uh, uh, put themselves into places where they uh, reinforce their prior beliefs rather than learn. And so, I think that it is a very important question to understand, um, but to put into proper context, which is to say that what we should be caring about is not necessarily misinformation per se, but whether or not various target populations are informed truthfully or not. And I think these are in many ways similar, but in many ways they're at odds with each other. We spend a lot of time focusing on long tail misinformation. So misinformation that may not be consumed by many people or maybe doesn't have a huge impact, and not enough time pursuing large scale types of information that may even be truthful, but leaves people misinformed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you say there's a lot of misinformation in like your field? Um, and economics and like the news about that, and like if so, like how do people in the field try to like tackle or avoid it?
So there is always a ton of misinformation when it comes to how the public perceives key things. Insofar as this has been something that's happened for the all of time. And so let's put that into that context.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about questions around news and misinformation, of course, there's tons of situations right now where people are not well informed. And one of the main focuses of my research has been to look holistically and try to understand the main points of contact that lead to misinformation. And we focus heavily on mainstream media as much as or more than we focus on social media and other newer types of media, because that's where people are consuming information. Most people still watch television, or they read mainstream news portals, or even read mainstream news that seeps into social media. And if you're worried about the typical American, what you're worried about is the selection and half truths that come out of mainstream media, or the fact that most people consume very little news at all. And that's going to be increasingly an issue as people move away from linear TV, cable, over-the-air television, which has a huge amount of news, into newer digital platforms, which quite frankly just have a lot less news anyways, let alone having misinformed news.
Uh-huh. What do you think is the worst type of either misinformation or disinformation? Like about what?
Ultimately, we care about people being misinformed, not just for the pure nature of it. We care about it for the decisions that people make.
Mm-hmm.
And we can look at this in terms of either kind of the typical person or the radicalized person. And for the typical person, ultimately, the costs are not that high. If people are misinformed, they're misinformed. The biggest concern should always be, will always be around the people who are radicalized. And so this is a much harder question because it's a much smaller group of people, but a small group of people heavily misinformed about the world can lead them to do very dangerous things. And obviously, we have a non-trivial right-wing domestic terrorism problem in the United States, and much of it is fueled by misinformation aimed at the hard right. And that is, for most of us, ultimately the most dangerous aspect of misinformation right now.
Mm-hmm. Um, I know you touched on this like a little bit before, but what do you think about the invention of like technology and its impact on misinformation and like the spread of it?
What do I think about the spread of misinformation based off technology? Well, people were super concerned about the impact of the printing press and the radio, television, the newspapers, um, and technology continues its march forward, of course, at a more rapid pace
Mm-hmm.
than it had in the past. And ultimately, technology is how we distribute, but it also does define the types of stuff that are created. And I think that we'll find that the concept of news will shift under new digital means of distribution. We have tend to make shorter things. We tend to have videos. We tend to have less bundles of information. So whereas you used to read the newspaper or watch your hour-long newscasts, you tend to watch separate things. You tend to choose on the topics rather than provide an overview of the last 24 hours. And typically, if people are getting news from YouTube or Twitch or TikTok, etc., they're not looking at quick reaction pieces as much as they're looking at other types of news, and this will shift things, but I don't think that we need to generally assume that the shifts in technology lead to something that's better or worse. It's different, and this will continue to happen. Ultimately, what matters is how people absorb this information and ultimately the decisions they make on top of it. And the regimes that we've had now under television and to a lesser extent newspapers or previously newspapers are, have its benefits and have its faults. The key thing I think that people are missing is that it is more difficult in the new regime to see a fully concept of shared reality. The idea that everyone was consuming something that's very similar, um, that is going to be less likely.
Hmm. Yeah, so those are all my questions. So just to close this out, do you have any advice for people, especially like teens, either just like general advice or like about information, either way?
So I think that it's always important to understand the type of sources that you're relying on for your information.
Mm,
And as you move away from a world of uh, you know anchors that we know and news sites that are heavily vetted, um, there are many ways in which you can see what the legitimacy of various news sources are and to try to understand that. But there's going to be more and more producers of news, and that's the nature of a more open digital platform. And in that case, it's not necessarily seeing it by the label, but understanding the type of information and continuing to question.
mm,
But I understand most people are pretty busy, and news is not the forefront of most people's concerns. And so, when you're sharing and reading, just try your best. And ultimately, I don't think we can expect the typical American to uh, worry so much about all of the things that people who worry about news do. Most people just get it where they get it on the sly, and that's fine. And I think that will always be the case, continue to be the case. And so ultimately, as a researcher, I focus more on just trying to think about both the good and the bad of that and how it's going to change. And if there's going to be major shifts in the type of stuff that people consume, it's probably going to be more on the platform level or more on the regulatory level that will try to help make this easier. Because again, I don't expect most people to think too much about it. They're going to consume what they consume, and ultimately, it's the responsibility of um, other people who research these and think about these things to try to provide um, uh, various safeguards that allow people who consume to get a good experience from it.
mm,
Um, and this kind of speaks to these questions about news literacy and other things, which are great, but ultimately, um, the people who choose to kind of inform themselves and focus on news literacy and focus on making good choices, those people are already probably okay. The vast majority of people who just consume things that kind of come through their feeds and whatnot aren't going to go out of their way to uh, take classes or to try to better their news diet. And so ultimately, if we're worried about that, then we need to be worried about things that can make that a better experience for them without assuming that they're going to spend a lot of time and energy trying to um, curate the right news diet for themselves.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So that will be it for today. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, and good luck with your projects.
Thank you. Bye.